your perspective, your experience, your perspective, what is it like to be homosexual and Mormon today?
Well, I'm not homosexual anymore, so I can speak what it is like to have been through that, and I can give some idea of what it's like for the men that I work with and that I know. But really, I would say that I come from a same-sex attraction background, an SSA background. That's what fits for me. I don't like the term ex-gay. I don't identify as homosexual by any means, but that's part of my background. It's part of my story. It's a very integral part of my life story.
Sure, yeah, and continues to be, obviously, with the work
really,
that
it's
you
part
do.
of my life mission is to share my experience and with others who are where I once was, and provide some hope and direction for those that want to follow a similar path. And I understand not everybody does, and that's okay.
Right. So how would you describe what it is like, or was like, or is?
Well, it was a huge torment. It was painful. It was conflicting. It was very, very shameful. And I don't know how much of that had to do with being Mormon versus another type of Christian versus just having a conscience. It didn't work for me. It wasn't right for me. And so I went through times where I identified myself as heterosexual, bisexual, gay. You've sort of been trying on different identities, and there was a time when I thought, okay, that's it, I'm gay. I just need to stop trying to resist or change or whatever and embrace it. And it did have, for a short time, it felt very freeing and exhilarating, actually, because to have all that stress off and like, okay, I don't have to change. This is who I am. This is the life I'm going to live.
Sort of self-accepting.
Yeah,
in a way.
and there's a spiritual component there for me too of self-accepting.
Yeah.
You know, that God loved me even as a gay man.
Yeah.
I didn't need to be straight in order for God to love me.
Yeah.
So there was a very freeing aspect of it. And then having adopted that and spent some time in Los Angeles and in the fringes of the gay community or in the gay community and dating men and having boyfriends, it was a pretty short-lived 6 months to a year kind of time when I was really sort of embracing that and getting ready to come out, I suppose.
And prior to that, had you ever been married or anything like that, or in an opposite sex or a mixed orientation relationship?
Yeah, although I don't care to talk about the first marriage that crashed and burned too much.
Okay.
It didn't end it didn't have any reasons that had anything to do with my SSA, but I came back from a Mormon mission. I was married, and from a girl I had dated before my mission, and 3 years later she left for another man for her own reasons. Yeah. So I kind of like write that off as a trial marriage and and don't tell a lot of people about it. But so from there, then I was I graduated from BYU and went to Los Angeles, and it was like, okay, now I'm free of any commitments, and I went to see a therapist and said, you know, it's essential that you not have an agenda for me, whether I'm going to be gay, whether I'm going to stay in the church. You have to be completely neutral about so that I can work with you. And she said I wouldn't have it any other way. So we started to work through
sort of self-directed, self-determined process of self-actualization.
It was very affirming that she was. That I trusted she didn't have an agenda. Obviously, if I went to my bishop, then he had an agenda for me, and there's a space for that, but that's not what I needed and wanted at that time. Right. So it was good to have just a completely neutral, and I talked to her about my dating man and what that was like. and so I was having that experience, but also still going to church. And I met a woman that I married shortly after named Marie, and started dating her at the same time. She was the first person who wasn't a gay man or a therapist who I told about my same-sex attraction. Wow. And she was so accepting. And I remember when I told her, her answer was, well, what does that mean for us? What do we do?
Huh, nice. What do we do with this?
Yeah, and it was, you know, I'm still choked up 25 years later that was her response. It was so affirming. And I think that was a moment when I fell in love with her.
That makes sense.
And so continued to work through it. And there was a short time where I was dating both men and women maybe just a month, and she said, you know, you really do have to make a choice here.
Yeah,
At least
yeah,
choose a gender if
yeah,
you can.
yeah.
You know, if you can't choose, you know, whatever.
Specifically her.
And for me, being in the thick of it, what I experienced was that I was a better man with her. I liked the man that I saw reflected in her eyes. She believed that I was better than I did.
Mm-hmm.
And
do you use man intentionally or rather than person? You know what I mean? Is that an
that's important language to me, yeah. To own that, to own my maleness, my manhood.
Mm-hmm.
And she, you know, and compared to the man I felt like I was when I was with a boyfriend or at a gay party or something, I just felt like I was living at a higher plane being with her, that it was my higher self.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I identified with. And so I knew that was, it was even more than choosing the church, I chose her.
Yeah.
And chose a life that I thought felt like it put me on a higher plane.
Right.
And in saying that, I don't want to judge anybody else who chooses a different path or didn't have that experience. It was about me and my conscience and what felt right for me. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that, you know, a gay life is wrong for anybody else, but I know for me it was wrong, and for me it led me down some really dark paths.
And can you say, like you say, for me, and like I like your language about, you know, what it made you feel about yourself. Was it like according to your value system that you felt you had, that, you know, it worked within the value system you felt like you had for yourself, or what was it that was affirming that this was a good thing for you? I mean, it felt good, but were the values, or what was it that felt right for you?
Well, it felt like a more balanced life that I didn't find in the gay side of things. It just seemed to be a lot about sex. It seemed to be a lot about the next party, lust. That took over my life. And I did have a sexually addictive background, so you know, that's part of it. I could, you know, I just fed into my addiction.
Yeah.
But with her, it was much more balanced. There was a sexual life, but there was a spiritual life. There was a professional life. There was just much more balance, whereas the other seemed to take over my life in more self-absorbing, decadent ways.
And I mean, how much of that were you able to parse out between, well, those are sort of cultural dynamics versus, you know, in the gay community?
Yeah, people ask that, and
versus your personal inclinations. Well, you were saying like you had a little bit of an issue with sexual addiction to some degree, and so that's very idiosyncratic and specific to you.
Right. Well,
I think. Could you parse out the?
I think any honest gay man will tell you that the gay culture is far more promiscuous than heterosexual culture. I know that's a non-acceptable statement to make, but my experience, gays among themselves privately will absolutely admit that promiscuity is a value for many people, not obviously for everybody.
It's like a cultural value.
It's a cultural value. Monogamy is not a cultural value for a lot of people in gay cultures.
More so, you're saying,
than compared to the typical heterosexual culture. And I know that statement would really enrage some gays, but my experience is that some gay activists attack me for not being on message, for not reflecting their sort of a gay theology, if you will. The message point is supposed to be this will and grace world of, you know, we're just like you, except it's with a man instead of with a woman or whatever. And that's just not authentic. In my experience, and the experience of a lot of people I know, it is a more sex-based, physically based, youth-based culture. And I think it's really disingenuous for them to claim otherwise, because in private they'll totally admit it. But to the broader heterosexual world, they don't want to admit it.
How much of that is sort of anecdotal versus, you know, statistically backed up? Do you know?
Well, it's both, and I can't quote you numbers right now,
Sure.
but I could point to some some research on that.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. I know there's a latest study that just came out that looked into monogamy versus promiscuity based between heterosexual and homosexual communities, and the numbers had dropped significantly since the 80s in both sexual orientation groups, but still promiscuity was still higher within the homosexual community than heterosexual. Both had dropped like significant, like we're talking around 20 percentage points from studies done in the late 80s.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that.